The dusty air inside the auction barn was thick with the scent of hay, leather, and anticipation. Outside, the Texas sun blazed down, but within those wooden walls, a strange kind of silence held firm. Buyers leaned on metal railings, boots coated in mud, cowboy hats low over their eyes. At the center of the arena stood a striking chestnut stallion. Muscles tight, eyes alert, and a white blaze down his face that made him unforgettable. His name was Red Moon. And next to him, far too small for the gravity of the moment, stood a little girl. She wore worn denim overalls and a faded pink shirt. Her name was Emily Breyer, though everyone called her Emmy. Her golden curls bounced as she took a brave step forward. Facing the towering figure in a tailored navy suit, William Lennox, a man known more for hostile takeovers than horses, she lifted her chin and asked the unthinkable, "Can you buy him for me?" Her voice was quiet but cut through the murmurs like a blade. William blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. He hadn't even planned on attending this auction. He was here for business, to acquire land nearby. Horses weren't on his radar, and neither were children. But there was something about her, something raw and unfiltered. Behind Emily, her grandmother, Clara Breyer, stood with a cane, her tired eyes fixed on William as if she, too, was silently begging. "Why do you want this horse?" he asked carefully. "Because he's sad," she said, eyes never leaving Red Moon. "And I'm sad too." But when I touched him, he closed his eyes. Like he knew how I felt. The room shifted. No one moved, but something had changed in the air. William felt it. A tightening in his chest he hadn't felt in decades. He looked at the horse, then at the girl, then at the auctioneer climbing the steps. Bids began to fly. 45,000. 50. 55. 60. The voices blurred as William watched Emily wrap her arms around herself. He didn't need another asset. But somehow, this wasn't about assets anymore. He raised his hand. 80,000. Silence. 80,000 from Mr. Lennox, the auctioneer called. Going once, going twice. Sold. Emily gasped, then ran straight to Red Moon, pressing her face into his neck. The barn erupted in whispers. William stood frozen, unsure what had just happened. He'd made billion-dollar decisions without blinking, but this felt different. Behind him, Clara approached slowly. "She hasn't spoken this much in weeks," she whispered. "You didn't just buy a horse. You brought something back to life." William said nothing. But as clouds rolled across the Texas sky, he knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the quiet hum of a box fan echoed through the modest farmhouse where Emily lived with her grandmother, Clara. The floorboards creaked beneath William Lennox's polished shoes as he stepped inside, visibly uncomfortable in a place where time had stood still. The kitchen smelled like fresh biscuits and old coffee. A faded photo of a young man in uniform hung above the mantel. "Emily's father," Clara said quietly, her voice trembling just enough to reveal the weight of years carried alone. William hadn't planned to follow up after the auction. He had intended to arrange for the horse to be boarded elsewhere, away from the dust and decay of rural life. But something about the way Emily had hugged Red Moon, like she was clinging to the last piece of a world that kept slipping away, had unsettled him. Against his instincts, he'd agreed to bring the horse directly to the Breyer family property, nestled at the edge of a forgotten road. And now, he stood in a house that smelled like grief and memories. Emily rushed in from the back porch barefoot, her curls bouncing with each step. Her eyes lit up when she saw William. "He likes it here," she said, beaming. "Red Moon." He walked around and sniffed everything like he knew it already. Clara's eyes met William's, and for a long second, he couldn't look away. There was something familiar in the shape of Emily's face, something that tugged at old corners of his mind. He brushed the thought aside. Coincidence, nothing more. Clara pulled out a worn chair at the kitchen table. You didn't just show up for coffee, Mr. Lennox. Why are you really here? William hesitated. The logical answer would have been something about responsibility or image, but none of that felt true anymore. I don't know, he admitted. She asked. I said yes. That's not something I do. Clara gave a small nod. Then maybe it's time you start asking yourself why. Outside, the wind stirred the tall grass as Red Moon grazed quietly near the fence. Emily was already by his side again, humming a song her mother used to sing. William watched her from the porch, his arms folded tightly across his chest. He'd spent years shutting out anything that resembled softness. But here, on this land forgotten by the world, something unfamiliar had cracked through the surface. And somewhere just beyond the horizon, a man named River Quinn stood near an old pickup truck, watching the Briar property from a distance. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands, his jaw clenched. He knew that horse, and he knew the story wasn't over. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting an amber glow across the pasture. Red Moon stood still near the old wooden fence, ears twitching, gaze fixed. Emily brushed his coat with a soft rhythm, her small hands working in silence. She hadn't noticed the man beyond the tree line, leaning against a rusted pickup truck with a cigarette in one hand and trouble in his eyes. His name was River Quinn, and he hadn't been back to this land in over 10 years. Not since the accident. Not since everything changed. William Lennox stepped onto the porch just as Clara brought out 2 chipped mugs of coffee. He wasn't used to silence like this. No buzzing phones, no board meetings. Only the creak of wood and the whistle of wind. "Who's that?" he asked, nodding toward the truck parked near the fence line. Clara squinted, then stiffened. "Quinn," she said quietly. "He used to work for my son. Broke horses. Broke a few other things, too." William sensed the tension in her voice. "Should I talk to him?" "No," Clara said firmly. "If he wants something, he'll come around. He always does." Meanwhile, River flicked the ash off his cigarette and stepped forward, but stopped short when Emily turned around. Her eyes met his for a brief second, just enough to make his heart stumble. She looked too much like her father. Too much like the past he couldn't outrun. River turned back toward his truck. Not today. He wasn't ready to face it. Not her. Not the truth. But Red Moon had found his way back here, and that meant something. Something big. Something buried. Inside, Clara watched William with a quiet curiosity. He wasn't the man she remembered from the headlines. There was something in his eyes, restlessness maybe, or regret. She finally spoke, carefully choosing her words. She doesn't know the full story about her parents. About what really happened the night her daddy died. William looked up, startled. "And you think she should?" Clara sighed. "I think people carry secrets until they start to rot. And that girl, she deserves the truth, even if it hurts." As twilight settled in, Emily climbed into the hayloft above the barn. She looked out at the stars breaking through the sky and whispered to Red Moon through a crack in the boards. "I think he's watching us," she said. "The man with the truck. I don't know who he is, but he feels like a storm." And storms, she'd learned, always meant something was coming. Morning came with a low rumble of thunder far off in the hills. The sky had turned a pale gray, and the wind carried the heavy scent of rain and soil. Emily sat cross-legged on the barn floor beside Red Moon, gently braiding a small strand of his mane. She hummed the same lullaby her mother used to sing, soft, familiar, fragile. William stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching her. The quiet between them had grown less awkward, though he still didn't know what to say when her eyes met his. Inside the house, Clara was pulling out a faded cardboard box from the back of a closet. She hadn't touched it in years, not since the funeral. The lid creaked as she opened it, revealing photos, letters, and a dog-eared birth certificate. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced her son's name on the paper. Then her eyes caught another document, one she'd nearly forgotten was there. An old letter, unsigned, but with a return address from Phoenix Marlowe, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in almost a decade. Meanwhile, William walked the pasture alone, his thoughts swirling louder than the wind. His phone had been buzzing since dawn. Voicemails, urgent texts, meetings postponed, but none of it mattered here. This place pulled at something old and unhealed inside him. He stopped near the fence, eyes narrowing when he saw tire tracks fresh in the dirt. River Quinn had been back, and not just watching from the distance. He'd come closer. William didn't like that. In town, River sat at a diner booth, tapping his fingers against a chipped coffee mug. He stared out the window, barely hearing the waitress as she asked if he wanted a refill. He was thinking about that night, the accident, the storm, and what he'd promised to keep hidden. Red Moon's return had changed everything. It was only a matter of time before someone put the pieces together, and when they did, River knew who they'd come looking for. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old photograph. Him, Emily's father, and a horse that looked just like Red Moon. Back at the farmhouse, Clara stood in the hallway, staring at William with an intensity he didn't expect. "You said you didn't know why you bought that horse," she said. "But I think you do. I think deep down, something brought you here." William met her gaze, his jaw tight. He didn't want to admit it, not yet. But part of him feared she was right. Up in the barn loft, Emily felt the first drop of rain hit her cheek. She looked out over the field, Red Moon at her side, and whispered, "I think something's coming." And this time, it wasn't just a storm. The storm finally hit just after sundown. Wind howled through the trees, and rain battered the tin roof of the barn in angry bursts. William paced inside, his shirt damp from trying to secure the loose boards outside. Red Moon shuffled nervously in his stall, ears pinned back, eyes wide. Emily sat beside him, calm in a way only she could be, softly humming to soothe him. "He's not scared of storms," she said. "He's just remembering something bad." Her voice was quiet but certain, like she knew what memory felt like in a body that couldn't speak. Clara was in the kitchen, staring at the phone on the wall. She'd thought of calling Phoenix Marlowe more than once that day. Phoenix had once been like family, a friend to her late son, and someone who had seen the Breyer family fall apart piece by piece. Clara wasn't sure what Phoenix knew, or what had been buried along with her son, but something told her the time for silence was ending. Her fingers hovered over the receiver. Outside, lightning cracked like a whip through the sky. Meanwhile, William stepped out into the rain, needing air or distance. He walked to the fence line where the pasture met the woods and stopped cold. River Quinn was there again. This time, he didn't bother hiding. His coat was soaked, his boots sunk into the mud, and the cigarette in his hand was long since extinguished. "You didn't ask where that horse came from," River said flatly. "You just bought him. Didn't stop to wonder why he looked familiar, did you?" William took a step forward. "What are you talking about?" River's jaw tightened. "That horse belonged to Camden Rook. Before the fire. Before the truth got buried out there in the dark." The name hit William like a punch to the ribs. Camden Rook, the man whose name had been quietly erased from Breyer family history. The man whose death had always felt unfinished. Inside the barn, Emily curled up in the hay beside Red Moon, clutching a worn photo she'd found in Clara's sewing drawer. It showed her father, younger and laughing, with a horse that looked exactly like Red Moon. She didn't understand how it was possible, but her heart told her it mattered. She whispered to the horse, "Were you his? Did you love him too?" Back at the house, Clara finally dialed the number. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered, older, tired, but unmistakable. "Phoenix Marlowe," said the voice. Clara swallowed hard. "We need to talk. It's time. and across the pasture, William stared into the eyes of a man who carried too many truths, and realized that everything he thought was coincidence was anything but. The next morning, the sky was clear, but the air felt heavier than the storm that had passed. Dew clung to the grass like a layer of sweat, and everything smelled of soaked wood and secrets that had been stirred loose. William stood near the barn, his arms crossed, watching Emily brush Red Moon with quiet devotion. Her tiny hands moved gently over the horse's side, like she was trying to listen through his skin. William had barely slept. River's words haunted him. Camden Rook. That name had no business being alive in this place. But it was. And it had clawed its way back into the light. Inside the house, Clara sat across from Phoenix Marlowe at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee untouched between them. Phoenix had arrived just after dawn, eyes shadowed, her hair tied back, but her presence still sharp and commanding. "You should have called sooner," she said. "I knew Camden didn't die the way they said. And I always had questions about that horse." Clara nodded slowly, holding the edge of a folded paper. Camden's last will, never filed, never read. It named someone unexpected. Someone who had just returned to their lives. "You think Emily has a right to know?" Clara asked, voice low. Phoenix didn't blink. "I think keeping it from her won't stop the damage. It'll only delay it." Clara looked toward the barn window. Then it's time she heard the truth. Out by the fence, River Quinn stood again, this time holding something in his hands, a saddle blanket burned at the edges. He approached William slowly. "Camden was your half-brother," River said, eyes fixed on the ground. "You didn't know because your father made sure no one ever did. But Camden found out. And that horse, Red Moon, was his last connection to the life he was building. Until the fire." William stared, unable to speak. The truth bent the ground beneath his feet. River held out the scorched blanket. "That barn didn't just catch fire. Someone lit it. I never told anyone. I was there. But Camden saved Red Moon. Got him out, burned his own hands in the process." William took the blanket, stunned. "Why now?" "Because that little girl loves that horse the same way Camden did. And she deserves to grow up with the truth, not the ashes of what everyone tried to bury." Inside the barn, Emily held the photo again and looked into Red Moon's eyes. "I think you knew him," she whispered. "And I think you're trying to tell me something." And for the first time, Red Moon let out a soft, low whinny, like a memory surfacing from deep inside his chest. The sound of boots on gravel broke the mid-morning stillness as William approached the barn, his mind reeling from River's confession. His half-brother. The words echoed in his head, twisting everything he thought he knew. The burned saddle blanket now sat folded on the seat of his truck like a silent witness. Red Moon lifted his head as William entered the barn, his eyes locking with William's like he recognized something in him. Emily was brushing his legs with quiet focus. She looked up, sensing something was different. "Emmy," William said gently, "can you give me and Red Moon a minute?" Emily hesitated, her brows furrowed. "He gets nervous when I leave." William knelt beside her. "I know. But I need to talk to him about your daddy." She stared at him for a moment, then slowly stood and walked toward the door, glancing back once. William turned to the horse, his voice low. "You were there, weren't you? When Camden died. You saw it. And now you're here, like you were waiting for someone to finally come back." Meanwhile, Clara and Phoenix sat on the porch steps, sipping coffee as the wind rustled the trees around them. "You saw Camden the night of the fire, didn't you?" Phoenix asked softly. Clara nodded, her eyes filled with pain. "He came to say goodbye. Said he had written everything down. Truths about William's father, about the land, the inheritance. He never made it out of the barn." Phoenix exhaled, Voice quiet. That fire wasn't an accident. And someone wanted that truth gone with him. At the edge of the property, River stood near the old shed, staring at the charred wood still standing from the fire. He hadn't slept. Memories of that night clawed at him. Camden shouting for someone to get the horse, the flames rising too fast, the sound of something exploding. And now that little girl, Emily, was tied to it all. She didn't know it yet, but Camden had left her more than a horse. He'd left her his heart, his legacy. Emily wandered to the back of the house, where the wind had knocked down an old tin sign. As she picked it up, a folded paper slipped from behind the post. Curious, she opened it. It was a letter, yellowed by time, addressed to "My daughter." Her breath caught in her chest. She couldn't read all the words, but she recognized the name at the bottom. Camden Rook. Back in the barn, Red Moon neighed sharply, louder than usual. William turned toward the door instinctively, and saw Emily standing there, holding a letter that would change everything. The letter trembled in Emily's small hands as she stepped into the barn. William turned slowly, his breath catching as he saw the name on the paper she clutched to her chest. Camden Rook. She looked up at him, her voice trembling but steady. Was he my dad? The question was sharp, innocent, and yet more mature than any child should ever have to ask. William hesitated. His instincts begged him to protect her, to shield her from the truth. But it was too late. She had already seen it. He knelt beside her, his voice low and careful. Camden was your father. He loved you, Emily, more than you'll ever know. Her lower lip quivered, and for a moment she looked so small, so breakable, that William felt something in his chest physically ache. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she asked, almost whispering. He looked down, unable to answer. Because no one was ready. Because grief silences people. Because some truths hurt more when they're spoken aloud. Clara stood at the barn door now, her face pale, hands wringing her apron. "I thought I was protecting her," she said quietly. "After Camden died, everything fell apart. There were too many lies, and not enough strength left in me to fight them." Emily didn't respond. She simply turned back to Red Moon and hugged his neck like he was the only thing in the world that hadn't changed. The horse stood perfectly still, as if he understood exactly what she was feeling. Meanwhile, Phoenix stood at the old shed with River. She held the scorched will in one hand, her brow furrowed. "This isn't just about land or money," she said. "This will names Emily as the heir to Camden's property and legacy. But it also names William as the co-guardian, if anything ever happened to Clara." River's eyes widened. That man? He didn't even know Camden was his brother until yesterday. Phoenix nodded. And yet Camden still trusted him. Somehow, he knew William would come. Back inside the house, William stood by the kitchen sink, washing his hands like he could scrub off the years of guilt and absence. Clara sat at the table, exhausted. "You were raised by the same man," she said. "But you became nothing like him. Camden saw that in you. I see it too now." William didn't speak. His hands trembled under the stream of water. Outside, Emily sat in the grass beside Red Moon, the letter in her lap. She stared at the horizon, where storm clouds gathered again in the distance. But this time, she wasn't afraid of what they might bring. The next few days passed in a blur of hard truths and quiet stares. Emily barely spoke, though she remained close to Red Moon at all times. Her world, once simple and small, had been split open. William sat on the porch most mornings, sipping coffee he didn't finish, replaying the letter and Camden's will in his head. He hadn't asked for any of this. Not the land, not the title of guardian, not the girl with eyes too much like his brother's. But somehow all of it felt right, or at least necessary. Phoenix returned with paperwork, documents that would begin the process of transferring the property to Emily. Officially. She's young, but she won't always be, Phoenix told William as they stood near the pasture. Camden wanted her to know where she came from. Who she is. William nodded slowly. And I want her to know who she's becoming. Phoenix glanced at him. Are you staying? He didn't answer immediately. For now. River had packed up and left before sunrise. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just tire marks in the dirt and a folded note on Clara's kitchen table. I couldn't carry it anymore. You were right to protect her. But it's not my place now. Clara read it twice, then placed it in the box with Camden's letters. The past would always be there, but it didn't have to lead every step forward. Some stories, she realized, were meant to be mourned, not relived. That afternoon, Emily approached William as he repaired part of the old fence by the barn. Do you think he knew I'd find the letter? She asked. William looked at her, then set down the hammer. I think he left it where he knew your heart would take you. She nodded slowly. Then I guess my heart still works. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't cry. She was growing stronger, even through the ache. William gently put a hand on her shoulder. Your father would be proud of you, Emmy. I think he already was. As evening fell, Red Moon stood near the edge of the pasture, staring out toward the horizon like he sensed something new coming. The sky was clear, but the wind carried change in its breath. Clara lit a lantern on the porch while Phoenix packed her truck. You'll be back? Clara asked. Phoenix smiled. If you'll have me. They both knew the answer. Inside the barn, Emily placed the photo of Camden in a small wooden frame and hung it above Red Moon's stall. You're home now, she whispered to both of them. And so am I. A month had passed since the storm, the one in the sky and the one in their lives. The Briar property had begun to feel different. Not new, exactly, but repaired. Softer. Like something broken had started to heal from the inside out. The fences were mended, the barn roof no longer leaked, and wildflowers had begun to bloom along the edges of the pasture, as if the land itself could breathe again. Emily ran barefoot through the grass, her laughter rising into the clear blue air, Red Moon trotting calmly beside her. William stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching her. He'd officially moved into the guest room 2 weeks ago. What had started as a temporary stay had become something else, something rooted. There were still emails and board meetings, sure, but now he read them under the shade of an oak tree while sipping Clara's sweet tea. He wasn't the same man who walked into that auction barn. He didn't want to be. You look like someone who finally stopped running, Phoenix said beside him. He smiled faintly. Maybe I was never running fast enough to get away. Inside, Clara organized a small wooden chest with documents, photographs, and one last sealed letter addressed simply to Emily Rookbriar. For when she's older, she murmured, placing it gently on top. She paused for a long moment, her fingers brushing over the box as if closing it meant letting go, for good this time. Then she whispered, "Thank you, Camden," and shut the lid with quiet resolve. Later that afternoon, Phoenix helped Emily gently place a handmade plaque on Red Moon's stall. It read, "He carries our story." Emily traced the letters with her fingers and then looked up at Phoenix. "Do you think horses remember everything?" Phoenix knelt beside her. "I think they remember the things worth keeping." Emily smiled, resting her head against Red Moon's neck. "Then I'll tell him everything again, just to be sure." That evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the fields gold, the whole family sat on the porch, Clara in her rocker, William beside her, and Emily curled up on his lap, fast asleep. A calm breeze swept across the land. For the first time in years, no one felt the need to speak. Everything important had already been said, or was understood in the silence between them. Out in the pasture, Red Moon lifted his head, ears twitching toward the wind. He wasn't restless anymore. He was still. And for the first time in a long, long while, so was everyone else.